Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of the drummer Alan Childs, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love and poetry. Has drummed for a lot of people and a lot of productions, including David Bowie, John Waite, Julian Lennon and hundreds of others, in fact, and has been in various musicals, mostly on Broadway, including Hairspray, Rent and Tommy. Anyway, you're going to find out more about that and so much more. So look, this is, Alan's in Las Vegas, which is always nice to go and visit. So after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to that exciting subject that was the early formative years. Alan, it's over to you.
I had a neighbor. I grew up in the housing projects in Brooklyn. I was born in Manhattan, but we moved to Brooklyn early on. And my downstairs neighbor on the 6th floor, I was on the 7th floor, they played a lot of R&B music, and I could hear it coming up from the pipes that ran through the building. And I made friends with the child in that apartment. He was my age. His name was Hilton. And I'd go to his house, and his mother, and they were African American, and they would play me stuff I never thought of listening to, like Sam Cooke, stuff like that. The Marvelettes,
right?
Please, Mr. Postman, which the Beatles covered, and that was like the awakening. And that's when I started buying 45 RPM records, and I was well into it. I might have had like 30 or 40 singles. And then on this date, how many years ago? The Beatles played on Ed Sullivan. On this Sunday, the 9th of February, they played for the first time on Ed Sullivan. And that did it for me and a million other musicians in America. That changed my life. Yes. Seeing it. Before that, it was just all audio censor, and I was loving it. But then when I saw the Beatles on stage playing their own instruments, singing, that absolutely blew my head off. And to this day, even when I think about that moment, watching it, it still blows my mind.
Yes, my God, that's quite the moment, isn't it? Yeah, you wouldn't believe, well, you probably would, how many people that just kind of at that age group, that was the moment. It all changed the whole course of their life. It's incredible power, isn't it? Or they call it in politics now soft power, don't they? So yes, it kind of culturally kind of changes the wibbly wobbly timeliney, as they say in Doctor Who. So there you go. So what age were you at that point?
I guess I was 12 when the Beatles were on Ed Sullivan.
My God.
And I already had a couple years of banging my head on my pillow. What I did was I had a transistor radio, and I put it under my pillow when I went to sleep. And I would put my hand under the pillow, and the transistor was under the pillow too, but I could hear it. That's when my hearing was still good. And and I would bang my head to the 2 and 4 of the beat of the song. So I remember there was a song by Bruce Chanel called Hey Baby. It had harmonica in it and kind of a Love Me Do kind of vibe.
Yes.
And I would bang my head to the 2 and 4. And that was the beginning of my musical
That was
life.
it. That was amazing. And what did your parents, what was their kind of life like at this stage?
Well, they were divorced, and my mother remarried, so I inherited a stepbrother and a stepsister. They were kind of behind me, not 100%. I had to beg my father, who now lives somewhere else. I'd see him once a month, and I was begging him to buy me a drum set. And my mother said that she'd hear me talk about drum companies in my sleep. And I'd actually send away for catalogs. I remember sending away to Rogers Drums, Slingerland Drums, and Ludwig Drums back then. And I'd get a catalog in the mail, and that was like porn. That was like a Playboy magazine. It's like, wow, look at that, you know. And eventually my dad bought me this very sad Zimgar drum set, not made very well, from Japan at the time, and missing a floor tom-tom, missing crash cymbal, no hi-hat. But at least I had a couple of drums to play on, and I'd play along to, I remember playing along to Herb Alpert, A Taste of Honey, Day Tripper, the Beatles, and the hardest one at the time was Herman's Hermits, I'm Henry the Eighth I Am, because it was so fast. It was I'm Henry the Eighth. So my right hand, as like drooling to keep up, you know. I'll never forget that. But eventually I got it. So that was the beginning.
Yes.
Those were the early days.
And when you got to 16, this would have been about 1967, 68?
Yeah.
So did you leave school at this stage, or did you stay on? Or were you, or had you already left by this point?
I left school when I was in 11. In America, high school is grades 10, 11, and 12.
Right.
And then you could go to college. But during the 11th grade, at that point, you know, flower power, hippie. At that point, we would meet at the school, and we'd figure out whose parents were both working that day, and we'd go to that person's house and listen to the latest albums that came out the past week.
Yes, my God, you would have.
Of course, we were smoking weed back and hash, and
yes.
we were bad boys. Yeah.
Yeah. So did you, at that point, you know, those early teenage years, did you suddenly go from that sort of black and white world to the Technicolor, psychedelic, flower power, Timothy Leary, tune in, turn on, drop out? Were you into garage rock or punk?
I was into everything, but I guess I epitomized the Timothy Leary period. We were tripping. We went to Woodstock. I had like a LSD religious experience when the Who came on. It's hard to put into words, but that was the pinnacle. That was the church of music at that moment. I'm not religious, but like that was religious to me.
Wow, that's fantastic. Yeah. So you were there. I've met a few people who both played and been spectators at Woodstock. I think it was probably better if you were a performer, because it sounded quite grim, really, in times. Did you have a ticket, or did you just go along because you knew it was going to be...
We snuck in.
We snuck in, my God.
Yeah, because I was playing. It was one of the first gigs of my life. I was playing at a hotel for the children by the pool in the afternoons. And then at night, we played for the kids again when the parents went to the nightclub to see a comedian and a singer. We were hired as a rock band. So I was 15 because I needed proof that I was 16 in order to work. So that summer, I was Dino Maniscalco because I had to get my brother's birth certificate to show that I was 16. But I was, so I wasn't Alan Childs that summer. I was Dino Maniscalco. Yeah. So we hitchhiked from South Fallsburg, which is up in the Catskill Mountains, and we hitchhiked from South Fallsburg to the site of the Woodstock site.
The Woodstock. Did you go on the Thursday or Friday to Woodstock?
No, very limited. We went because we had to play. We had to do our gig, but we played hooky on the Saturday night. What we did was we hitchhiked Saturday afternoon. It took us a long time to get to the site. And when we got there, Janis Joplin was on already. Fantastic. It was nighttime already. Janis Joplin was already playing. We took our seats in the back in the mud, And after Janis was Sly and the Family Stone,
Wow.
and then the life-changing Who came on.
My God, that was it. Did you get quite close to the front at this stage?
No.
And what
It was packed. We couldn't attempt it. It was so like packed that we were good. We could see and hear, so we just sat down and enjoyed the trip.
Well, absolutely. And at that stage, had you started also picking up on all those bands like the Rolling Stones, the Kinks, the Who? Were they all part of your consciousness at this point? Were you kind of familiar with everything they were doing?
Very deeply. I used to go to a record shop in Greenwich Village. It was called Generation Sound, I believe. It was a few steps down, and it was one block east of Electric Ladyland Studios, where Jimi Hendrix had his studio. And I used to love going into Manhattan to the Village. And in Generation Sound record shop, they had, which was new to me at the time, British imports. And when I saw that pile of records, I was like freaked out. Look, it's a different cover. And it's soft. It's softer too. It was a different material. And look, there's different songs on the album than the American release. I was like so into it, and I actually stole quarters from my stepdad, who was a cop. I stole quarters from his Globe bank.
Mm-hmm.
He put quarters in there, and I would take, like $10 in quarters and go take the train to New York to Generation Sound, because the British imports were a little more money than a regular American album. And I paid him back eventually one day. I told him what I did. But I had a pretty impressive record collection.
Well, absolutely. Yes, that would have been.
Yeah.
And what was the kind of the West Coast sound? Was that resonating with you, like Jefferson Airplane and Country Joe and LA from like the Doors and people like that? Were you also kind of tuned into that scene?
Yes, but not as much as the British scene. The British scene for me was heads over the West Coast scene. I mean, I know the West Coast scene was, started most of that stuff. But I like the musicianship better from the British rockers. And but I did like the Doors. I had their album. I had Country Joe's album, which, looking back now, not my favorite. But I liked one or two Airplane albums.
Yes.
I had the Grateful Dead Anthem of the Sun, which was their second album. I liked some of those jams.
Yes.
Actually.
I know there was Working Man's Dead, and there was another one that we all got. I can't remember. I don't know. American Beauty, I think that was the other one.
Yeah, they had a couple of albums with like a single, like a successful single on it. And I think American Beauty was one of them.
Yeah, they had to wait until the 80s, didn't they, to get their next hit single, I think, with something about being grey. But then, so as the 60s progressed, then we had, the things start really well, don't they? And it's all beautiful and fluffy. And it kind of ends on a bit of a downer, doesn't it? There's the Charles Manson thing. Then there's the death of Brian Jones, which is like, wow, someone's died. And then Hendrix, Morrison, Joplin. How did that kind of affect you? Because you were still in your teens at this stage and would have gone, oh, that's a bit of a downer. And then, Altamont, what was that like?
Horrible. It was a terrible feeling, though the music kept coming, though. I mean, Humble Pie's Rock On album came out in that time period after Altamont, and it was still pretty strong. It was only a couple of years later, after Cream broke up and Hendrix was gone, and I couldn't find bands that excited me like those bands anymore, like American bands either. I mean, there was like a void at a certain point. And then this new music emerged, fusion. And it was like jazz players with Marshall amps, playing kind of rock sounding stuff, but with expertise of their musicianship on top of it. So like a good example would be Blow by Blow from Jeff Beck.
Yes.
That was his first excursion into fusion. And I kind of got into that scene because there was nothing challenging at the time. For me, Cream, they were challenging musically.
Mm-hmm.
It just wasn't a pop tune. There was something deep in there and musically happening. And that seemed to have gone in the early 70s. It was kind of slipping. It was nothing like, no, that sounds derivative. That sounds weak. And, and the fusion came along. And I got into that for a few years. And it was at that point, the mid 70s, where I personally started getting my name around New York City as a working musician. And, so that was a good time.
Yes. So did you like people like, there was a Soft Machine in the UK, and then there's
Love Soft Machine.
And John McLaughlin, was he one of those guitarists that you liked, the sound?
Yes.
What about people like Miles, Bitches Brew?
Yes.
So
I latched on to that whole scene and it also brought me back into jazz, like straight ahead jazz. My uncle, my father's brother, was a famous jazz musician. He played with Miles Davis.
Wow.
He played with Buddy Rich. He played with Stan Kenton. So, I guess I got something from my uncle musically.
Yes. And what about people like Weather Report? Did they come into your orbit as well?
Major. Return of Forever. Chick Corea's Return of Forever, it was called. That's another band that was major. I guess it was Mahavishnu, John McLaughlin's Mahavishnu Orchestra, and Chick Corea's Return of Forever. Right. Those two albums were major for me. I wore those albums out. I eventually returned to rock and roll when like the Cars came out. I guess you call it new wave.
Yeah. What about the musicianship of people like Steely Dan then? Were they kind of, that kind of really, amazing produced and amazingly played music? Did that get to you?
Yes, I appreciated that. Yeah. But slowly, like there was some new rock coming up that was like, oh, that's a little different than the late 60s and the early 70s. And
so blues rock wasn't the thing that you were sort of, because a lot of people go towards blues rock, but you were going more for jazz and that kind of heritage.
Yeah, but blues rock played a major part of me, those late 60s years, mid to late 60s, that's embedded in my soul. From John Mayall and the Blues Breakers with Eric Clapton, Humble Pie, the Stones, all of the Who.
Yes,
that was the first.
What about Dave Clark 5?
Yeah, even though Dave Clark didn't play drums on the records, I liked some of their songs because and then years later, like in the 80s, when the power pop thing happened, like bands like Jellyfish.
Yes,
power pop. I mean, that was fantastic. Bands like that. Todd Rundgren did a couple albums like that.
What was, but then there was that kind of punk, in New York you would have had Suicide, and then you would have had, I suppose you'd had MC5 as well. I don't know where they're from actually. Anyway, but you had, like Suicide, and then that experimental scene with people like the New York Dolls and Johnny Thunders, and then the Ramones, and then Talking Heads and CBGBs and Max's Kansas City. Did that kind of interest you at all? Or did that kind of pass you by?
That passed me by only because I was starting to work. And that was important to me. And I didn't have as much time as I used to when I was able to just go to the record store, steal money to buy records and then go home and listen to them and submerge myself into the music. Now I'm out more from my house and playing with different bands in New York as a sideman. And it was during that time when I really started to work that scene came up. Right. Blondie, CBGBs. Now so I was like a mercenary back then. I was like, you pay me, I'll play. and a band called me up and they said, hey, listen, you were highly recommended. We're doing a gig at CBGB's. And we'll rehearse once. Could you do the gig with us? And I said, sure, yeah. And the gig was over, and I'm packing up my drums, and the back doors of CBGB swing open, and these roadies start wheeling in Marshall amplifiers. And I'm like, the night's over. What are they doing? So I stopped one of the roadies. I said, what's going on? And a very thick Cockney accent, which I almost couldn't understand. He said, AC/DC are going to play in a half hour for Ahmet Ertegun's Atlantic Records. It's like a party. And they just played the Palladium on 14th Street. And they finished, and now they're coming over to CBGB. So I'm guessing it was around midnight. And the club's empty. They emptied the club out from the original 3 bands that played. And now limos are pulling up with the guests for Ahmet Ertegun's party. And there's Blondie, there's Ahmet Ertegun.
Yes.
There's Phil Ramone, a famous producer. And like I'm standing there, I told the guys that hired me, I'm going to pack up and thanks, pay me and I'll see you next time. So I didn't want to say anything that the roadies just told me that AC/DC were playing. So I was kind of hiding on the side with the drum set, and I managed to stay. And I just was on the side enough that no one noticed me. And AC/DC came in and played 20 minutes. This was with Bon Scott. Yes. And it was the loudest thing I ever heard in my life, but it was fantastic. And that's my CBGB story.
That's it. Yes, you were there.
As far as those years.
Yes. And then so it's that Gun for Hire. What then happens towards the late 70s, early 80s at this stage? Because music starts to alter a bit, doesn't it? Because you slowly MTV appears, and then there was that kind of yacht rock movement, wasn't there? It wasn't called yacht rock that time, but there were people like the Doobie Brothers, and I mentioned people like. Yeah, that kind of rather smooth sound, wasn't there? There was a bit of a George Benson started to appear. And then as you got into MTV land, everyone started wearing those jackets with the sleeves pulled up and the mullet hair. So how do you navigate into the 80s?
So I was in a band that got signed to CBS Records, and they were called Bullseye.
Right.
And that was 79 maybe. And it was kind of like a Foreigner corporate hard rock kind of sound, like Foreigner. That's the best I could do with that. Then we broke up, and we met this guy from England. He married one of Aerosmith's ex-wives, and he was a singer-songwriter. So half of this band, Bullseye, did a rehearsal with this British singer, Kelvin, and he had some cool songs. And also, he was already aware of the scene in England. He just came over, and they were a little ahead of us, like the Duran Duran thing and that kind of. And so his music was more like that, which was a little foreign to me. I was... the hard rock Foreigner thing was very familiar to me, but this whole, it's almost like a dance, some of it disco beat almost, but in a new wave form.
Yes, because I always think when you think of foreigner, I always think of REO Speedwagon, Journey, possibly Boston, but those ones, because they used to always have those romantic ballads that used to do slow dances to at discos in the UK. They all had that classic, didn't they, heartfelt song, but they're massive production and huge anthemic choruses. People loved it.
Yeah, so I'm playing with John Waite, and he was in a band called Bad English, which was very corporate, big ballad. They had like 5 hits, and I think 2 of them or 3 of them were ballads. And yeah, that's the corporate thing was happening, but then it slowly started going under, and the new wave thing was taking over. Elvis Costello, Duran, XTC, and like a whole new world opened up, and that I was into that world.
Right, my God. So Bad English even had the guitarist, didn't they, from Journey, Neil?
Yes, there was half Journey, yeah. So in fact, I'm leaving Wednesday for Legends of Rock cruise with John Waite. The headliner is Alice Cooper.
Beautiful, absolutely.
But one of the acts is I want to meet him so badly is Robin Trower.
Oh yes.
The original guitar player for Procol Harum.
Classic, yes, Robin. My God, I
can't wait to meet him. I can't wait to see him.
I don't know where he lives. I always thought he lived somewhere in England, quite close to East Anglia. Because you never know. You don't hear about these people for ages, and they either become recluses or whatever. I mean, that's amazing. So so then your love affair in the 80s, this is where your moment really kicks in, doesn't it? But do you then do a project with a band called EPM as well, No Lies?
Yeah, that's Eddie Martinez. He's a guitar player, and he played on Robert Palmer's Addicted to Love.
Right.
That's mostly him and Andy Taylor from Duran Duran. But the main guitar is Eddie. He played on that Breakthrough Run DMC video when there's a hard rock guitar in it.
Yes.
And that's Eddie in the video as well, on top of the car playing guitar. Eddie's a very well-respected studio guy. He played with Mick Jagger albums. He Rod Stewart. He's just amazing. And we were friends because after Bullseye, before the British guy came into the picture, I played with Nona Hendryx. She was part of a female band called La Belle.
Oh, yes, because there was a really good book about the importance of the La Belle, which I have somewhere here, which was
great musicians passed through her band. But they broke up, and Nona, one of the singers, wanted to be the first black rock singer.
Yes.
And she put this band together, and I was in it. I had audition, but I got the gig. And that's how I met Eddie Martinez. And through Eddie Martinez, I met Carmine Rojas, a bass player that played with La Belle as well, but not with Nona Hendryx. But I met Carmine through Eddie, which is the Bowie connection.
Right, behind me. Yeah, because I think Nona, she did an album, was it Captain Beefheart material as well, many years later? No, that's down the line. So you started working with John quite as a solid band at this stage, because was it Mask of Smiles was your first, work with him?
Yeah. I did a tour with him first, which was While Missing You came out, and it went to #1. Then he put this band together, and that's where I actually got to meet and play in a band with Carmine Rojas. We were the John Waite band. Earl Slick from Bowie was the guitar player.
Wow. Yeah.
This is after the Serious Moonlight tour.
Yeah.
Carmine and Slick were both on the Serious Moonlight tour. That's 83. And then 84 is when John put this band together, and it was me, Slick, Carmine, Tommy Mandel, keyboard player, and John. And that was called the No Breaks Tour. And that was the tour that went on during the time Missing You was #1.
Wow, that's a good time to join any band. What's it like when you kind of lock together with a bass player like Carmine or just anybody? Does it take a while to sort of get that energy or that kind of vibe going between you? Do you have to work things out much?
No, that's the beauty of working with someone that you're in the same place musically. It's almost you don't have to say a word. It's just you're listening to each other and the song, and the parts kind of work themselves out when you're rehearsing. We might say something, let's do this or that, but in general, uh, the chemistry between Carmine and I was excellent, and we lasted a few years together
Well,
as
yes.
as a team. Yeah.
Because you do quite a lot of different ones. Do you also then work on this other album called Afternoons in Utopia as well? Is that one that is yours by Alpha Feel?
Oh yes, the German band.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm on a couple of tracks on that album.
So
That's during the time. Uh, it was the '80s, and I was going from band to band with Carmine mostly. Like we'd go from John Waite, then we'd go to Julian Lennon,
yes.
two tours with Julian and an album, and then Bowie.
Bowie appears. How did you get on with the production? Because the 80s does have a particular vibe, doesn't it? I went to see Bowie on his Serious Moonlight tour at Milton Keynes, and I mentioned that to Slicky when I did an interview with him, and he said, yeah, they had these cows, we went around, those kind of sculptures around Milton Keynes, these cows. I think he was probably a bit out of it. It was a bit like, well, what are these big cows doing? But he coped, and it was a great tour, and that was where Bowie had really sort of upped his kind of stadium rock, really, wasn't it? And production skills. So, yes, it was good. Yes, but production, and then you had the click track. How did you cope in the studio with these producers who are starting to want to get MTV sound and that kind of hit record?
Well, click tracks started coming into play late '70s, early '80s. Fortunately, I had no problem playing with a click track. Some people did. Um, in fact, I played with it so often, I could push ahead or lay back and still stay with the click. Um, that's a gift. And I was lucky. Some people can't even play to a click. But I didn't, it was like brushing my teeth. It didn't bother me. In fact, I used it on purpose on the Glass Spider tour because on a previous tour, one of the drummers with David was speeding up and slowing down, and David was complaining. And I've never known to do that, speed up and slow down, but I wanted the tempos perfect for David every night. So what we did was me and my drum tech, before the tour started and at rehearsals, we got the tempos of every song. And he ran the click for me. And those were the early days. There was no in-ears yet.
Mm-hmm.
Weren't in-ear headphones yet. So what we did was the tour was so huge and we're playing stadiums, he put the click track through a little guitar amp, like one of those practice amp, pig nose they call them. And he put it near my hi-hat at an angle so my left ear could hear it, but it wasn't being picked up by the microphones. It was at an angle, so it was away from the microphones. And I used that click track every night, every song.
Blimey.
And David never had to worry about the song's too fast or we played it too slow this night, And so, and I had no problem playing with the click, so it was great.
Well, it's good. Well, no, I
So
spoke to quite a few drummers who were slightly, I have to say, broken by the experience of being in the studio and the pressure. And then it kind of ends up with them getting kicked out of the band and developing a heroin addiction. And then sort of, their life falls apart. But they said the tension can be horrendous. And then, the producer says, look, we'll just get another drummer in who can play the parts. And it kind of, that studio experience gets worse and worse for everybody. And, it's like, it's kind of quite grim. I don't know if you obviously never had that problem in the studio with any producers, have you?
no. And then, at one point, of course I preferred not to play with a click, but the songs with Bowie, I mean, it was okay to play to a click because there were no like a jazz change or change of tempo, or it was pretty straight ahead. So the click, I was just having a ball.
Yes, well, absolutely. So when did you sort of realize that when did you get the call for that? Because when he did his, Tony Thompson was the drummer on Serious Moonlight, and then he had Dennis Davis, didn't he, a bit earlier than that? So he didn't obviously work with Tony Thompson again, did he, after that experience? So then, so you and Carmine kind of knew each other. Who gave you the call? Who sort of had picked up on you?
So if we want to go with the bigger names, John Waite was the first big tour. Then
Yes.
Julian Lennon was the second and third big tours with an album in between. In between, after the second tour with Julian, we were back home in New York. Even Julian was living in New York at the time. We put a band together, the backup guys for Julian's band mostly, which was with Carmine. We put a band called the Dutch Angles, which is a film camera angle. We put a band together, and we played maybe 3 gigs in the New York area. But whenever we played, it was packed because people would think, well, these are the guys that played with this person and that person. Maybe they'll show up. So every gig we did was packed, people hoping to see one of the singers we back up. And one of these gigs was in New York at the China Club. And Carlos Alomar,
yes,
Bowie's musical director, guitarist, of course, was friends with Carmine because they did the Serious Moonlight tour together. And Carlos started coming down to check out this band, Dutch Angles. And he, in fact, wanted to play a song with us. So we learned a song for Carlos, and he would jam with us whenever we played, the 3 or 4 times we played.
yes.
And one night in the offices of the China Club, where all kinds of weird things happened, Carlos came over to me and he goes, "Hey, Alan, you got anything lined up? You have anything coming up?" I went, "Not really. I don't know of anything yet." And he went, "Would you want to play with Bowie?" And I was like, could you repeat that? It was a noisy room. I was like, I wanted to make sure. He said, "Yeah, Bowie. Would you want to play with Bowie?" I went, "Yeah, of course." And I didn't hear from him for like 2 weeks after that. And I just forgot about it. Then I get a call from this accounting firm that handles Bowie, John Waite, Julian. It's called, what was his name? The guy's name was Bill Z.
Right.
Sound Advice was the company. They were on 57th Street in Manhattan. He calls me up, and I know him because he was the accounting company for the Julian tour and the John Waite tour, and they would come out to visit once in a while. So I already knew this guy that worked at Sound Advice, the accounting company. He calls me up, and he goes, "Hey, Alan, Duran Duran need a drummer. They want to fly you out." I was in New York. "They want to fly you out to LA and have a play with them." And I said, "Bill, I think I'm up for the Bowie gig." And he said, "You're not. I have the list in front of me. You're not on it. And the number 1 choice is Terry Bozzio from Missing Persons and Frank Zappa.
Right.
So I said to Bill, let me call you back. And I called Carmine immediately because I'm good friends with him at this point. I said, Carmine, Bill Z called and asked me to go out and play with Duran, but Carlos mentioned that I could do the Bowie gig with you guys next tour. And Carmine says, don't go anywhere. I'll call you right back. And he calls Carlos. Carmine calls me back. He goes, oh, Alan, we're so sorry, man. Carlos, you were in the band that night when Carlos said, would you like to do Bowie? Just Carlos didn't call you and confirm, that's all. Blimey. So I'm like freaked out that I'd been in the band for 2 weeks already. I didn't even know it. And so I called back Bill Z at the Sound Advice Company, and I said, Bill, listen, I just spoke with Carmine, who spoke to Carlos. I am the drummer for this next Bowie tour. And he starts yelling at me. I'm going, what are you yelling at me for? You know, because he wasn't informed of anything, you know. But that's the story, how I got the gig. And so David really never heard me. It was David telling Carlos, look, my company asked Terry Bozzio to do the tour. Bozzio, I think, asked for $1 million, something outrageous. And Bowie said, forget it. And he called Carlos and said, Carlos, get one of your New York guys. And I was the guy.
You were the guy, my God. So then was that 86 or 87 you got that call?
That was the end of 86 or the beginning of 87. Let me just shoot back a little, because this is funny. When I was still going to the Fillmore and Humble Pie played, the first time I went from Brooklyn into New York to the Fillmore, I didn't have enough money to get into the Fillmore. I had just a train fare. And I stood at the side of the fire escape doors and listened to Humble Pie do their first show in New York. I was in love with Humble Pie. I loved Peter Frampton's guitar playing. The next year, they did another tour, and I had money. I saw them at the Fillmore, and that was the recording of Rock in the Fillmore, that big album, that live album recorded at the Fillmore East. And when they finished the Fillmore run, they did one gig in Long Island, and I went to the gig in Long Island. And I went to the restroom, and the door next to the restroom opened. It was Steve Marriott. And I was like, you know, as a kid, I was like, holy fuck, that's Steve Marriott. And he looked at me and he goes, you like a slice of pizza? I went, yeah. And he took me in the dressing room and gave me a slice of pizza. That was their catering back then. And Peter Frampton was in the room. And I'm like, looking around, I'm like, oh my God, I'm in the, you know. And then the road manager came in and goes, you guys are on in 5 minutes. Hey kid, get out of here, you know. So that had to be 70, whenever the Fillmore East, Rock and the Fillmore came out. And then fast forward to 87, now I'm at the first rehearsal with Bowie. Guess who the guitar player is? Besides Carlos Alomar.
Peter Frampton. Yes.
It was like, whoa. And should I ask Peter if he remembers me, the guy with the slice of pizza?
Well, I know. And I guess you would have owned Frampton Comes Live in sort of 84 time as well, because that was the other album that we all had in the record collection, didn't we, somewhere down the line. So when you got that call for the Bowie one, and he's got this kind of, he's done Tonight, the album, he's done Never Let Me Down, the follow-up album, then you're then you sort of all turn up for the first rehearsal. Do you get a bit of, you know, prompting or some sort of music to learn to play, or do you start listening to the records beforehand? What happens?
Well, it's funny, but I did have the Bowie albums. I was a Bowie fan. The first rehearsal, though, was for a press tour. We went to like 13 countries in 15 days, and we played like whatever city we were in, Madrid or New York, we would play the cool club of the day. Like in New York, we played the Cat Club, and it was a press conference in every city. And We learned 3 songs before David got there. Bang Bang.
Was it Day In, Day Out?
Day In, Day Out, and one other one, I can't remember. And he is such a nice guy, David, because we never met, and he comes in the room. We already did an hour of rehearsal. We learned the songs. So we're waiting for David. He comes in the room. This guy is a star. I mean, this guy walks in a room, something special just happened. It just comes out. This guy's a beautiful superstar. I mean, he's a great guy. And I get introduced to him, and I didn't know what to say. That's how dumbfounded I was. Like, I have all your albums. I was like, I don't know it was that kind of setting. Anyway, so the band's across the stage like this playing, right? And David's in front of us, facing us.
Yes.
And he never heard me play. And, he's going on Carlos Alamar's word that this is the right guy for this tour. And during the middle of the first song, it might have been Bang Bang, David looked right at me and went like this. It's like he knew. I'm thinking, I hope he likes me. Like, he knew I was probably thinking that. And he was courteous enough to go. In the first 2 minutes, I mean, it was like,
yes.
What a God.
It's
What a
like just
nice...
getting, yes, that was quite nice. So obviously it's quite a complicated and big tour, because actually I came to see you in Berlin when you did that tour. So I was there at the Brandenburg Gate, and yes.
Reichstag,
The Reichstag, yes, in front of that. And that was quite, because Berlin was celebrating something like the 750th birthday. No, some massive weekend, because there was one night there was Genesis played, Bowie played.
Right.
And then there was another one with Eurythmics, and I think Paul Young was there. And I we were coming to Berlin, and we went tied in with the Bowie one, because I saw him in Serious Moonlight and then Live Aid and then Never Let Me Down. So yes, so then he's got this band, massive stage. So you obviously haven't seen that, and then a whole dance choreography, which is a bit Cirque du Soleil, isn't it? So how does it then all come together? Because it's not like, great, we'll go through the numbers a few times. We'll be at the marquee. We'll get better as the tour goes on. This is quite elaborate, isn't it?
Yeah, it was a little, maybe too much, but
a little bit too much. It was quite complicated.
The dancing part was not my favorite, but I understand where David comes from, and the theater aspect of it. But actually, I remember the Berlin gig, and the band got way better later on. That was early on, Berlin.
Right.
That was one of the early gigs. And I remember it wasn't like the greatest for some reason. The only thing that was touching about that gig was when we did Heroes, I could see the first couple of rows of people. I could see people crying.
Right.
Because there were visuals behind us of Mussolini, Hitler, stuff like that. It just got emotional for some people. And we had a part of the PA was turned to the East Berlin side because David wanted the kids in the East Berlin to hear the show.
Yes.
Which was pretty amazing.
Yeah. And did you, as a band, did you feel like that also you got on better as the tour went on and sort of ironed out bits and pieces and got it to what you really wanted it to sound like?
Yeah, the band actually, as people, we got along from day one. There was never any ego problems or anything like that. It was a great tour as far as that goes. And the band, I guess, like most bands, it took a minute to get used to the size, the stage size, the monitor systems, doing something that big.
Yes.
Because like I said, the first 2 weeks we did a press tour, which was the total opposite. We're playing in a club, in a club that holds, 200-300 people maybe. And, that was comfy. We were very used to that. But then when we got to the big stage and the monitor systems and stuff, it took a week or two to feel okay. It's starting to come together.
Who was your producer or engineer as the sound at that point? Because I know when he did Serious Moonlight, I think he suddenly had to sort of phone Tony Visconti, and they'd had a bit of a falling out, but he had to say, "Look, I'm really sorry. Can we be friends again? Oh, by the way, can you come and sort out the sound problems we've got?" Who was your sound man for that particular tour?
Tony Blanc. He's a British engineer who lives in the States now, and I see him occasionally because he lives on the East Coast, and he was doing tours just a couple of years ago. He was in Vegas, and he texted me, and he was doing Cher.
Right.
So he invited me to one of those hotels on the Strip, and I saw him. We went for sushi, and I saw Cher. And he was also on another tour a year before that with this band, with Beck.
Right.
I can't remember the other band, something Elephant, maybe. Some newer bands. That Spoon was one of them.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, it was like 4 bands. And I saw him that night too. Yeah.
Amazing. Tony Blanc.
Yeah.
So what's it like, being on the road for nearly, is it 18 months and literally a world tour? How do you feel when you sort of eventually get to the end? Because I spoke to a few people who were quite gaga by the end. They're sort of like have lost the plot slightly. Were you able to cope with it, dealing with it, like, such an intense period?
Yeah, I was built for it. That's my thing. I could go on tour forever.
Right.
I mean, that's just how, I didn't grow up with a stable, solid family life. So to me, being on tour with the band that we get along, we're like a family. And to me, that was like, let's keep going, and I was lucky enough, especially in the 80s, to jump from tour to tour to tour to tour to tour. And now miraculously lately in the last couple of years, I'm back with John Waite after he called me back after 33 years. He goes, "What are you doing, Alan?" I go, "Well, I moved to Vegas. I just finished a show here, but it ended." He goes, "Want to play again?" I said, "It took you 33 years to call me back." But yeah, so I've been with him for I don't know, ever since, right before the pandemic.
Yes.
And now I'm leaving Wednesday, I told you, for the Legends of Rock cruise.
Yes.
Then we have scattered dates throughout March and April. And then late May, we start a tour with, funny you mentioned his name, we're going on tour with Rick Springfield, Wang Chung, and Paul Young.
Jeezy crazy. That's going to be
an 80s package like you wouldn't believe. And that seems to be the trend in America now. There's a tour going on this summer with the Vapors.
Oh, yes.
And I can't remember the rest of the bands, but they're all 80s.
Brilliant. Oh, yes, you've got on this one, you've got dear old Colin Blunstone from the Zombies is going to be on this one as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that, to meeting him. I'm looking forward to meeting Robin Trower.
Yeah.
I met Jason Bonham before. Alice Cooper, I don't know. I don't know. I'm sure he's a nice guy.
I'm sure. Yeah, so then, you come off that tour, it's the 90s, suddenly we have grunge, the music scene's changing, because suddenly there's those bands like Soundgarden, Nirvana, Systems of Down, Marilyn Manson, Red Hot Chili Peppers. How do you then navigate your 90s period?
This is where I make an extreme left turn, as they say. I did do a tour in the 90s with Debbie Gibson because Carlos was involved with it in the beginning. That was the only reason I went down. But I ended up doing a tour with her. I also was in a car accident before that. I couldn't play for 6 months. I broke my arm. I have 2 titanium plates in my arm. But my first gig back was with Debbie. And then something weird happened. I got a call from a New York City Broadway show contractor. And he said, I got your number from a musician that played with you. And he said that you're a rock drummer that could read music. And I said, well, yeah, I did learn how to read music. He said, imagine this scenario. Those are the words he used. He goes, you're on tour. It's a Broadway show, but it's The Who. It's Tommy, the rock opera. And Pete Townshend will oversee the show. It started already on Broadway. He's asking me to do the tour. So I said, I have never done a Broadway show. I have never worked with a conductor. I have no clue. And he said, do me a favor. I'll set it up for you. Go down to the orchestra pit of the New York show and watch the drummer and watch how it works with the conductor and the band. Mm. And I'm a workaholic. So for me, not having anything lined up in the next month was like tragedy in my life. It was like, I can't not work for a month. So I went down, and I always had this impression like the Broadway guys were old and fat and reading the paper until their parts came up. And I was pleasantly surprised. I was like, wow, there's mostly young guys and they're playing. And they're playing good. I was like, shocking. And I'm like, I could do this. And but I saw it as a challenge because I never read a showdown. You know, it's a book this thick of the music. Every song, it could be like 6 pages across 2 music stands. And, I wanted to do that. I wanted to say to myself, I could do that, because I never did it before.
Yes.
And so I had to audition.
Nice.
And so there were like 28 drummers in this room waiting to get called. And I'll never forget, I went over, this drummer comes up to me. He goes, didn't you play with Bowie? And I went, well, yeah. He goes, well, what are you doing here? I go, I have to work, right? I mean, Bowie made a lot of money. I did okay. I did all right, but, I got to continue. And then I freaked him out. I said, hey, could you help me out? When do I come in? When the conductor's hand goes up or when it goes down? And he looked at me. He couldn't figure out if I was being serious or joking with him. And he walked away. He just walked away. And I was serious because I wasn't sure, And they called my name and there was no band. It was a drum set and an acoustic piano. And I was so green. I didn't know anything about Broadway. I said to the guy in charge, I go, where's the band? Because there's no band. It's just you and a piano player. I said, yeah, but it's acoustic pianos. That means I have to play very soft. And that's not how I play this kind of music. He goes, we'll understand. We understand. You'll play to the volume of the piano. It was so stupid, Anyway, and there's like a table of people sitting across the table. There's like the associate conductor, the producer, all these people, the dance captain, all these. And so it's me and the Broadway conductor guy who plays piano. And he goes, okay, Alan, they sent me 3 pieces of music the week before. And so I remember it was Go to the Mirror Boy from the Who's Tommy rock opera. And he goes, okay, here we go. It's just me and piano. And he counts it off. We didn't do 16 bars. He goes, stop. Great. Okay, let's take out Pinball Wizard. And he's doing it on a piano. Ding, 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 ding. It was like ridiculous. And I played that. Also 16 bars. Oh, sounds great. Stop. And here's the scary part. Okay, Alan, no piano. I'm going to stand in front of you and conduct you, take out the overture. And I'm going, this is unbelievable. I'm playing alone, right? But now this is the moment of truth, because he's in front of me with his hands like this. And I'm not 100% sure. And I just winged it because, I did sit in the pit and watch the New York show. So
Right.
I kind of had an idea where I come in. I was just, let's go, see what happens. So he goes, okay, ready, Alan? Ready? Ding, ding, the overture.
Yes.
And I passed the audition.
Wow.
By the time I got, they were answering machines in those days. By the time I got home, there was a message. Alan, this is the contractor. The gig's yours if you want it. Because I had a pretty impressive resume.
Yes.
For Broadway, I'm a authentic rock drummer playing in a rock show, a Broadway style rock show. So I got the tour, and I got to be very good friends with Pete. And that was the beginning of 17 years of, like I said, I like to be on tour. I went from one show to the next show, nonstop. Sometimes I had 3 days off in between shows. I would go from The Who's Tommy to Rent to Aida, Elton John's Aida, to Hairspray, to Whistle Down the Wind. I just like, they kept calling me like, this rock drummer could read, it's like, and so it was a lifesaver because I get a pension now.
Yes.
Because it was musicians union, and every paycheck, I didn't even think about these things back then, but I had health coverage and I was building up a pension, and I did so many years that when I hit 65, I got this big manila envelope from the American Federation of Musicians showing me if I want to retire, how much money I would make. I was like a cartoon. My eyes bulged out of my head. It was like, really? Wow, someone's watching over me. But then I got it, I never retired. I'm still, I worked through the whole way.
Yes.
When I got to Vegas, I was doing this show called Rock of Ages. I believe it was in London for a while. And it was an 80s musical about a guy and a girl from the Midwest going to Hollywood to try and realize their dreams. She wanted to be an actress. He wanted to be a rock star. And it's all done to music of the 80s. Journey, REO Speedwagon, all the Foreigner. And it's funny because in the last 2 years with John Waite, we've been playing with Foreigner, REO Speedwagon, Christopher Cross. It's so funny how.
My God, yes, there is that sort of, and then obviously you got that slightly hair metal world of Bon Jovi, which sort of elevates kind of classic rock even higher, doesn't it? Even in those days. So you did, so that was about, Broadway was about 93, wasn't it? And Debbie Gibson was around the 90s. So really.
Before that, yeah.
Yeah, so that was all the way through the 90s, the O years. And then you moved to Vegas, 2011 time?
2012 on my birthday,
right?
November 26th, and the Rock of Ages show started the beginning of January 2013.
Right, you were there.
Yeah, so I was doing Broadway that whole time, and then the gig here, Rock of Ages. I did the American version of Rock of Ages tour, and it lasted a year, and then a non-union version went out. They asked us if we wanted to do it, and we did a year of that. And then I said, I've had enough of this Rock of Ages thing. And a producer from Vegas called, and I just recently got married for the third time. I met a Japanese girl in Osaka. I was doing a show there for 3 months. And so we ended up getting married. So coming to Vegas was the first time I wasn't on tour and we could be together for the first time without me traveling. So that's why I took it. So Rock of Ages Vegas lasted, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, something like that.
Yes.
It was at the Rio and at the Venetian. And then it closed. And then John Waite called.
Blimey, that is such a good number. And what I found doing this show is that a lot of people who have that period, in the 80s, which is my general decade, or the 90s, when they've had that kind of, I don't know, 5 or 6 years in the limelight, they've done the first album, the second, possibly a third, they've done tours. That next wave of 16, 18-year-olds come along, and they're kind of not that excited about what's just been. They want to discover their own music. So, but then decades later, people start going back and thinking, oh, what happened 30 or 40 years ago was pretty cool. And you got the fans from that period who grew up and have, now haven't got the kids at home and got a bit of money and want to go out. And then you got that new generation who are discovering this music, a bit like, what I did, when I was growing up, getting excited about the 60s, because I was too young then. So I think that's the thing that you probably get with these, people back on tour. It's like promoters are going, there's a great market out there. And,
yes,
want to see that album. They want, play the whole album. Don't worry.
That's true. And, you're getting the people that were in college when they were young, and they want to relive that moment, that music, and then they bring their kids.
Yes. And it's
sometimes it rubs off, sometimes it doesn't. But this market is slowly fading, of course, because people are just fading out. But there's still a little left. There's still a couple of years left.
Well, I think, when you think about it, there's still 2 members of the Beatles left, and most of the members of Fleetwood Mac are left, and, the Rolling Stones. So it is kind of quite boggling, really, how it's all sort of continued on. But with the John Waite kind of tour that's coming up, you've got quite a few dates on this, haven't you?
Yeah, we're pretty busy for the most of the year. There's a couple of months where we're just doing like 3 gigs a week. So yes. I could come home, and that's good too. I have a cat. And but then the summer that's when you go out for the couple of months,
Yes. So with this one, do you again rehearse much beforehand? Have you got together and gone through it a few times? Is this the first time you played with John for a while?
No, I've been playing with John since before the pandemic. But the funny thing is, we never, ever rehearsed. Even my first day back with John before the pandemic, after 33 years of not playing with him, he called me up and said, here's the song list. That's it. Learn it. Sound check, sound check is sound check, a half hour, went over a couple songs, and we winged it. And we have never rehearsed. When we have a new guitar player, there's never rehearsal. It's just unbelievable. And by the way, John, he's 72, like me. And he's actually singing better now than with the babies, because his voice matured. It's more rounded. It's remarkable. Yes. And plus, we don't do in-ears. He's old school. He wants monitors and stuff. And I hear his voice loud and clear coming through my wedges, the monitors. He's killing. I don't understand. His mother, he just came back from Manchester. His mother's 100. So he's 72, but he's like he's 50. It's like he's killing it every night.
Brilliant. And actually, he's done well recently, because he got did the federal judge sort of, sued UMG to regain control of their masters. So does that mean he's got his back catalogue all under control now?
That's right. And plus, one of his songs is now a commercial.
Happy days.
And also, there's a show on Netflix called Missing You.
Right.
And the song's in there somewhere.
And it's a bit like Nick Lowe's got that song, Peace, Love and Understanding, I think, which got played in one of those soundtracks that just went,
Oh, really?
yeah, it just got, suddenly he became a millionaire overnight. It was like, oh.
Was that his version or Elvis's version?
Well, I don't know, but he wrote the song, so it kind of didn't matter. I think it was like probably, but he was the writer and he owned it. So,
yeah.
So Peace, Love and Understanding was the one that, that was that one that was one of those soundtracks, even which was very famous in the 80s. So that's the way to do it, isn't it? Really?
Oh,
so,
yeah, that's great.
So with Vegas, then you're living there. Does that mean that when this tour is done, that you'll be looking for work again, or are you quite happy just rolling with home life in the beautiful city, the fabulous Las Vegas?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think if John hangs it up, I think that'll be it for me, and I'll do a radio show or a podcast and play all the music I grew up with and loved. I tried that once before a few years ago. It was fun, but I didn't have enough time.
Yes.
But I'm also thinking of moving to Japan in the future.
Yes.
Because it's not fair. My wife's only 50, and and she's there right now. Actually, I'd like her to be with her folks. They're getting a little old.
Yeah,
They're just only a little older than me. but we'll see. I mean, I can't think of an artist that I really would like to play with. Yeah, maybe Peter Gabriel, but he's never called me before. But I don't know. I might do other things. I also record at home now.
Yes.
I do my own recordings. I just did a version of See Emily Play.
Oh,
Pink
nice.
Floyd. Yeah, I did it as if Bowie was singing it, and I know Bowie did a version of it.
He did, yes.
But I did it as if Bowie was singing the Pink Floyd version.
Yes.
So I play all the instruments and I just throw them out on SoundCloud, Alan Childs Aftermath. I don't sell it. I just throw all these songs out, and that keeps me sane. I play guitar, I sing, I try and. You might get a kick out of See Emily Play.
Yeah, I will. I'll check that out. Check
it out when you have a minute.
I will. And amazing. Well, look, I hope your tour goes really well. And yes. And thank you ever so much for your time. And
thank you, David.
Amazing to hear your stories, actually. It was quite something. But anyway, look, have a lovely day. And
you too.
Take care. See you later.
Take care. Bye.
I'll be in touch. Bye. Indeed, a classic end. A massive thank you to Alan for giving me the time for that. This is the C86 Show, David Eastaugh. If you want to contact me, you can on all those social media platform sites. Do C86 Show. You'll find me somewhere. And also, all these interviews have been archived on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. It's a true story. So anyway, have a great week. Stay safe.